He was just delivering pizza to pay for community college. I wasn't expecting to find the next Einstein drawing quantum equations on the back of a napkin at 2 in the morning. Professor Eleanor Chen's voice cracked as she recalled that fateful night. Her eyes glistened with tears of pride as she gestured toward the young man standing beside her on the Nobel Prize stage, the youngest theoretical physicist ever to receive the honor. No one could have predicted that a chance encounter between a burnt-out physics professor and a delivery boy with an extraordinary mind would reshape our understanding of the universe. But before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed. Because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. Professor Richard Harlow had built his reputation on precision and skepticism. For 25 years, he had commanded respect in the halls of Cambridge University, his name attached to 3 groundbreaking papers on quantum field theory that had earned him accolades, tenure, and a corner office overlooking the historic campus green. Students both feared and revered him, colleagues deferred to his expertise, and the academic world expected greatness with each publication bearing his name. But that was before the failure. On a chilly October evening, Richard sat alone in his office, surrounded by stacks of research papers marked with red corrections and half-empty coffee cups. The harsh fluorescent light cast a sickly glow over his tired face, emphasizing the deep lines that had formed around his eyes over the past 18 months. He stared blankly at his computer screen, where the same email had remained open for over an hour. "We regret to inform you that your paper, Novel Approaches to Quantum Entanglement and Dark Matter Interactions, has been rejected for publication." The words had burned themselves into his retinas. His 3rd rejection that year. The academic community had begun whispering that Professor Harlow had lost his edge, that his best work was behind him, that perhaps it was time for him to step aside and let younger, fresher minds take his place. Richard rubbed his temples, fighting back the migraine that had become his constant companion. 7 years of research, collaboration with brilliant doctoral candidates, countless late nights, all amounting to nothing. The rejection wasn't just a professional setback, it felt like a personal indictment. His theory, which had once seemed so promising, had fundamental flaws that he couldn't resolve. The mathematics simply wouldn't cooperate, leaving gaping holes in his work that peer reviewers had been quick to identify. He glanced at the family photo on his desk. His wife, Sarah, their daughter Emma, now studying medicine at Edinburgh, and their son Michael in his final year of high school. They had always been so proud of him. He wondered if they would still feel that same pride if they knew how close he was to academic irrelevance. The university clock tower chimed 11 times. Richard sighed and began gathering his papers. There was no point in staying any longer. His mind was too clouded with disappointment to make any progress tonight. Perhaps after some rest, he'd find the answer that had eluded him for so long. Or perhaps it was time to admit that he had reached the limits of his capabilities. As he stuffed the research into his worn leather messenger bag, his stomach growled. He realized he hadn't eaten since breakfast, a hastily consumed piece of toast as he rushed out the door that morning. Sarah was visiting her sister in Manchester for the week, leaving Richard to fend for himself. The refrigerator at home would be empty, save for perhaps some questionable leftovers and a bottle of milk past its expiration date. He pulled out his phone and searched for nearby delivery options. Most restaurants in Cambridge had closed for the night, but a small pizzeria called Stella Slices was still taking orders. Their website advertised "open late for the university crowd," and their slogan, "Food for Thought," seemed ironically appropriate for his situation. He ordered a medium margarita pizza and settled back into his chair to wait. 45 minutes later, Richard had fallen into a light doze when a soft knock on his door startled him awake. "Pizza delivery for Professor Harlow," called a young, male voice. "Come in," Richard responded, rubbing his eyes and reaching for his wallet. The door opened to reveal a young man, perhaps 20 or 21, with untidy dark hair and sharp, intelligent eyes. He wore a faded red delivery jacket with the Stella Slices logo patched onto the breast pocket. In one hand, he held the pizza box. In the other, a worn backpack that seemed stuffed to capacity with books. "That'll be $8.95, sir," the deliverer boy said, setting the pizza on the edge of Richard's desk. As Richard handed over a £10 note, he noticed that the young man's eyes had wandered to the equations scrawled across the whiteboard that covered one wall of the office. There was something in his gaze, not the vacant curiosity of someone looking at incomprehensible symbols, but a focused, analytical interest. "Keep the change," Richard said, expecting the young man to leave. Instead, the delivery boy tilted, his head still studying the equations. "Excuse me, Professor, but I think there might be an error in your field equation." Richard stiffened. Had he just been corrected by a pizza delivery boy? "I beg your pardon?" The young man shifted uncomfortably, suddenly aware of his presumption. "I'm sorry, sir, I didn't mean to overstep. It's just that..." He paused, gesturing toward a complex set of calculations in the upper corner of the board. "If you're trying to reconcile quantum field theory with gravitational effects on dark matter, that coefficient should be negative, not positive." Richard stared at him, momentarily speechless. The equations on the board represented months of work involving complex theoretical physics that most doctoral students struggled to grasp. Yet this delivery boy had identified, with a single glance, the very issue that had been plaguing his research. "What's your name?" Richard asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "Alex, sir. Alex Reyes." "And how?" "Alex Reyes. Do you know anything about quantum field theory?" Alex shifted his weight from one foot to the other, his gaze dropping to the floor. "I read a lot, sir. The university library is open until midnight, and they don't mind if I sit in the physics section as long as I'm quiet. And Professor Chen's lectures. She posts them online, and I watch them during my breaks." Richard leaned forward, studying the young man more carefully. There was nothing remarkable about him at first glance. Worn jeans, scuffed sneakers, the standard uniform of a delivery driver. But his eyes betrayed an intensity that Richard recognized. It was the same hunger for knowledge that he had once possessed in his youth. "You don't study at Cambridge?" Alex shook his head. "No, sir. I'm taking night classes at the community college. General education courses mostly. I can't afford university yet, but I'm saving up." Richard gestured to the chair across from his desk. "Sit down, Alex." Hesitantly, Alex slid into the chair, placing his backpack carefully on the floor beside him. Richard opened the pizza box and offered Alex a slice, which he declined with a polite shake of his head. "Tell me more about what you see in these equations," Richard said, moving to stand in front of the whiteboard. For a moment, Alex remained silent, as if deciding whether this was some kind of test or trick. Then he took a deep breath and began to speak. What followed left Richard Harlow, Cambridge professor, veteran physicist, and academic elitist, completely astonished. Alex outlined not only the error in Richard's coefficient, but proceeded to explain how that error rippled through the subsequent calculations, creating the contradiction that had stymied Richard's progress. He spoke rapidly but clearly, using terminology and concepts that demonstrated an understanding of physics far beyond what any self-taught student should possess. As he warmed to the subject, he stood up and moved to the whiteboard, gesturing at various sections of the equations, suggesting adjustments and alternative approaches. "If you reconsider the interaction through this framework," Alex said, picking up a marker and scribbling a series of symbols in a blank corner of the board, "you might avoid the inconsistency altogether." Richard watched in stunned silence as the young man outlined an approach that was elegantly simple, yet addressed the very paradox that had been the downfall of his paper. It wasn't just that Alex understood the existing theories. He was thinking beyond them, making connections that Richard himself had missed. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. "Where did you learn all this?" Richard finally asked when Alex had finished, and self-consciously returned the marker to the tray. Alex rubbed the back of his neck, a flush creeping up his cheeks. "Like I said, I read a lot, and I practice. Every night after my shift, I work on problems." He hesitated, then added, "Sometimes I make up my own." "You make up your own physics problems?" Richard couldn't keep the incredulity from his voice. "Yes, sir. I find it relaxing." Richard barked out a laugh, not from mockery, but from genuine surprise. In all his years of teaching, he had never met a student who found inventing advanced, theoretical physics problems relaxing. "Show me your backpack," Richard said, motioning to the worn bag at Alex's feet. Alex looked uncertain, but reached down and hefted the backpack onto his lap. He unzipped it to reveal what appeared to be dozens of notebooks, their edges worn and pages crinkled from constant use. Richard picked up the one on top and opened it. The pages were filled with densely packed equations, diagrams, and notes, written in a meticulous hand. Richard flipped through them, his amazement growing with each page. This wasn't the work of an amateur enthusiast or a talented undergraduate. These were the calculations and theories of someone with a profound understanding of theoretical physics. "How long have you been working on this?" Richard asked, his voice hushed. Alex shrugged. "Since high school, I guess. About 6 years. And no one has seen these? Who would I show them to?" Alex's question wasn't bitter or self-pitying. It was genuinely perplexed, as if the idea of sharing his work had never occurred to him. Richard looked up from the notebook, studying Alex with new eyes. 6 years ago, he would have dismissed this scenario as impossible. A pizza delivery boy with no formal training, developing sophisticated theoretical physics models in his spare time. But now, faced with the evidence before him, he couldn't deny the truth. Sitting across from him was a raw, untapped genius. "Alex," Richard said slowly, "do you realize what you've done here?" The young man shook his head, confused by the professor's tone. "You've independently derived equations that took teams of physicists decades to develop. And here," Richard pointed to a particular page where Alex had sketched a model of particle interactions. "This goes beyond anything currently published. This is original research." Alex's eyes widened, but he remained silent, as if afraid that speaking would break whatever strange spell had led a Cambridge professor to take his amateur scribblings seriously. Richard closed the notebook and handed it back to Alex, his mind racing. If even half of what he had seen was valid, this young man possessed the kind of innate understanding of physics that appeared perhaps once in a generation. The kind of mind that could push past the boundaries where Richard himself had faltered. But Alex was already standing up, hastily stuffing the notebook back into his backpack. "I should go, sir. My manager will be wondering where I am." "The next delivery?" "Wait," Richard said, reaching into his drawer and pulling out a business card. "Take this. I want you to call me tomorrow." Alex accepted the card, looking at it uncertainly. "Why?" "Because," Richard said, "I think you might be the solution to a problem I've been trying to solve." Alex glanced at the pizza box, then back at Richard, his expression somewhere between confusion and suspicion. "Is this about the equations?" Because I could be wrong. I don't have a degree or anything. This isn't about degrees, Richard interrupted. It's about understanding, and you understand physics in a way that most of my doctoral students never will. The clock tower chimed. Midnight, its deep tones reverberating through the old stone building. Alex startled at the sound, shouldering his backpack. I really have to go, Professor Harlow. Thank you for listening to me. He moved toward the door, then paused. I don't know if I can call tomorrow. I have classes in the morning and a double shift starting at 3. Richard felt a flicker of worry that this extraordinary mind might slip away, back into anonymity. When are you free? Sunday morning? The shop doesn't open until noon. Sunday morning then, 9 o'clock here in my office. And bring your notebooks, all of them. Alex nodded, his expression still uncertain but with a flicker of something new in his eyes. Hope, perhaps, or the dawning realization that his solitary intellectual journey might finally have found an audience. After Alex left, Richard sat motionless in his chair, the pizza forgotten. His mind replayed the conversation, examining each moment from every angle, questioning whether he had somehow misinterpreted or exaggerated the young man's abilities. But the evidence was undeniable. The corrections Alex had made to his equations were not lucky guesses. They demonstrated a sophisticated understanding of theoretical physics that couldn't be faked. Richard pulled Alex's notebook from his desk drawer, the one he had quietly slipped out while returning the others. He began to read more carefully, making notes of his own in the margins. As the night deepened around him, the clock tower marking the passing hours with its solemn tones, Richard found himself experiencing something he hadn't felt in years, the electric thrill of discovery. By the time dawn broke over Cambridge's ancient spires casting long shadows across the quad, Richard had filled a legal pad with notes and questions. He had also come to a decision that would alter not only his own future, but the trajectory of theoretical physics itself. The weekend couldn't come fast enough. Saturday dragged interminably. Richard found himself checking his watch every hour, wondering if Alex would actually show up the next day, or if the entire encounter had been some sort of stress-induced hallucination. He reread Alex's notebook 3 times, finding new insights with each reading. On Sunday morning, Richard arrived at his office at 8, an hour before the scheduled meeting. He tidied his desk, cleared the whiteboard, and arranged 2 chairs side by side where they could both work comfortably. He brewed a pot of coffee and set out 2 mugs, along with a plate of pastries he had picked up from the bakery on his walk to campus. At precisely 9 o'clock, there was a knock at the door. "Come in," Richard called, trying to keep his voice casual despite the anticipation that had built over the past 2 days. Alex entered, looking even more disheveled than he had during their first meeting. His hair stood up at odd angles, and dark circles shadowed his eyes, suggesting he hadn't slept much. But he carried a large canvas duffel bag that bulged with what Richard assumed were the notebooks. "You came," Richard said, unable to keep the relief from his voice. "You asked me to," Alex replied simply, as if that were explanation enough. Richard gestured to the chair he had prepared. "Have a seat. Coffee?" Alex nodded gratefully, setting the heavy bag on the floor beside him. Richard poured him a cup and pushed the plate of pastries in his direction. Alex hesitated, then took one, biting into it with the eager appreciation of someone who didn't often indulge in such treats. "I've spent the last 2 days reading your work," Richard said, sitting down across from Alex. "The notebook you left—" "You kept one of my notebooks?" Alex interrupted, his eyes widening. Richard had the grace to look slightly embarrassed. "I apologize for the subterfuge. I wanted to verify my impressions before our meeting today. I can assure you it's safe, and I've made no copies." Alex seemed more surprised than upset. "And? What did you think?" Richard leaned forward, fixing Alex with an intense gaze. "I think you may have solved the unification problem." The young man froze, pastry halfway to his mouth. "The unification problem? You mean the reconciliation of quantum mechanics and general relativity?" "Yes." Richard stood up and walked to the whiteboard, where he had transcribed some of Alex's equations earlier that morning. "Here, on pages 72 through 89, you've developed a mathematical framework that might, and I stress might, as it would need, rigorous testing, account for the behavior of quantum particles in gravitational fields without the inconsistencies that have plagued existing theories." Alex set down his coffee mug with a shaky hand. "But that can't be right. If I had actually done that, it would mean you've achieved what physicists have been attempting since Einstein." "Yes." The color drained from Alex's face. He looked down at his hands, then back up at Richard. "Professor Harlow, I'm just a delivery guy who likes physics. I didn't set out to solve one of the biggest problems in theoretical physics. I was just playing around with ideas. Some of the greatest breakthroughs in science came from playing around with ideas," Richard said. "Fleming discovered penicillin by accident. Archimedes had his eureka moment in a bathtub. But those were actual scientists," Alex protested. "I don't even have a degree." Richard felt a twinge of impatience. The academic gatekeeping that he had once championed now seemed absurd in the face of the raw talent sitting before him. "Einstein developed special relativity while working as a patent clerk. Newton formulated calculus without formal training in mathematics. A degree doesn't make a scientist. Curiosity and insight do." Alex fell silent, his gaze dropping to the bag of notebooks at his feet. Richard could almost see the wheels turning. In his mind, re-evaluating years of private mathematical explorations in light of this new perspective. "What happens now?" Alex finally asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Richard took a deep breath. What he was about to propose would either be the most brilliant or the most foolish decision of his career. "I want to work with you, Alex. I want to help you develop and formalize your theories, then publish them." Alex's head snapped up. "Publish? Like in a scientific journal?" "Precisely." Richard returned to his seat, leaning forward with growing enthusiasm. "With my guidance on the academic framework and your extraordinary insights, we could produce a paper that would revolutionize our understanding of physics." "But my name wouldn't be on it," Alex said, a statement rather than a question. Richard blinked, taken aback. "Of course, your name would be on it. You would be the primary author." "Really?" The surprise in Alex's voice revealed more about his self-perception than any direct statement could have. "But I'm nobody." "Science doesn't care who you are," Richard said firmly. "It only cares if you're right. And if these equations hold up to scrutiny, you may very well be right about something fundamental." Alex ran a hand through his already disheveled hair, leaving it standing even more wildly. "This is a lot to process." "I understand," Richard said, softening his tone. "And you should know that this won't be easy. There will be intense scrutiny, probably skepticism about your background. The academic world can be ruthlessly elitist. Like you were when I first mentioned the error in your equations." Alex asked, a hint of a smile playing at the corners of his mouth. Richard laughed, genuinely amused by the young man's perception. "Exactly like that, only multiplied by 100 peer reviewers, each more pompous than the last. So why bother? Why not just publish it yourself?" The question wasn't accusatory. Alex seemed genuinely curious about Richard's motivations. "Because it wouldn't be ethical," Richard said simply. "These are your ideas, your insights, and frankly, there are aspects of your work that I don't fully understand yet. I couldn't defend it properly even if I wanted to." The honesty of this admission seemed to reach Alex in a way that all the previous praise had not. He straightened in his chair, looking Richard directly in the eyes, for perhaps the first time since they'd met. "Okay," he said. "What's the first step?" Relief washed over Richard. He had feared that Alex might refuse, might retreat back into his solitary world of late-night calculations and unshared brilliance. "The first step is to select which aspect of your work we focus on for the initial paper. We need something groundbreaking but defensible, something we can present with absolute confidence." Alex nodded, reaching down to unzip his duffel bag. He pulled out notebook after notebook, stacking them on Richard's desk until there were at least 20 volumes of varying sizes and conditions. "These are everything," he said. 6 years of ideas. Where do we start?" For the next 3 hours, they pored over the notebooks together. Richard was stunned by the breadth and depth of Alex's work. There were explorations of string theory, quantum gravity, multiverse hypotheses, some wildly speculative, others rigorously mathematical. Alex explained his thought processes with increasing confidence as Richard asked questions and took notes. When the clock tower struck noon, they had narrowed their focus to what Alex called his quantum correspondence theory, an elegant mathematical framework that suggested a new way of understanding how quantum particles interact across space-time. If correct, it would resolve several long-standing paradoxes in quantum field theory. "This is it," Richard said, tapping the page where Alex had outlined the core principles. "This is what we build the paper around." Alex looked both excited and terrified. "What now?" "Now," Richard said, "we need to find a way for you to devote more time to this work. You can't develop groundbreaking physics while delivering pizzas until 2 a.m. The young man's expression fell. "I need the job, Professor. Rent, food, my sister's medication." Richard held up a hand. "I understand. What if I could offer you a position as my research assistant? The stipend isn't luxurious, but it would cover your basic expenses and give you access to the university's resources." Alex's mouth opened, then closed. "You would do that? For me?" "Not for you," Richard corrected. "For science, and perhaps a bit for myself as well." He smiled ruefully. "I've been stuck in a rut for years. Your fresh perspective might be exactly what I need." The young man looked down at his notebooks, then around the office with its shelves of academic journals and physics textbooks. When he met Richard's gaze again, there was a new resolve in his eyes. "When do we start?" Richard extended his hand. "We already have." As Alex shook his hand, Richard couldn't help but feel that he was witnessing a pivotal moment, not just in this young man's life, but in the history of physics itself. Whatever came next, nothing would be the same for either of them. What neither of them knew was just how profound that change would be. Within 6 months, their first paper would shake the foundations of theoretical physics. Within a year, universities around the world would be scrambling to replicate and build upon their work. And within 5 years, the name Alex Reyes would become synonymous with a new era in our understanding of the universe. But on that Sunday morning in Cambridge, they were simply a professor and a delivery boy, united by curiosity and the universal language of mathematics. As they bent over the notebooks, the autumn sunlight streaming through the leaded windows of the old university building, they were taking the first steps on a journey that would lead them far beyond the boundaries of conventional physics and into the uncharted territories that only the rarest minds can glimpse. For Richard Harlow, it was the beginning of redemption. For Alex Reyes, it was the door to a world he had only dreamed of entering. For science, it was the spark that would ignite a revolution. The Cambridge University Department of Physics transformed. In the early spring months, whispers traveled through the hallways faster than light particles in the Large Hadron Collider. Students gathered in hushed circles, their conversations abruptly halting whenever Richard or Alex approached. Faculty members who had previously ignored Richard's existence now found reasons to linger outside his office door, hoping to catch a glimpse of the mysterious young man who accompanied him to the research library each afternoon. Alex struggled to adjust to his new reality. The transition from anonymous delivery boy to research assistant was jarring. He moved through the prestigious halls with shoulders hunched, eyes downcast, flinching whenever someone addressed him directly. His worn jeans and faded t-shirts stood in stark contrast to the polished appearance of the other students and faculty. Richard offered to take him shopping for new clothes, but Alex declined, mumbling something about saving the stipend money for his sister's medical bills. "They don't believe I belong here," Alex confessed one afternoon, 3 weeks into their collaboration. They were working in the department's advanced computing lab, running simulations based on Alex's quantum correspondence theory. The room was empty except for them, but Alex still spoke in a hushed tone, as if afraid of being overheard. Richard looked up from the screen, where complex data patterns pulsed and shifted. "Does it matter what they believe? It matters if it affects how they evaluate our work," Alex replied, twisting a pencil between his fingers until it snapped. "I heard 2 doctoral candidates yesterday. They were saying that you must have lost your mind, hiring a pizza boy without even a bachelor's degree." Richard leaned back in his chair and removed his glasses, pinching the bridge of his nose. He had anticipated resistance, but the swiftness and intensity of the department's reaction had surprised even him. Professor Eleanor Chen, head of the Theoretical Physics Division, had summoned him to her office the very day after he'd submitted the paperwork for Alex's research assistant position. "Richard," she had said, her tone measured but her eyes sharp with concern, "I've always respected your judgment, but this is unusual. This young man has no academic credentials whatsoever." Einstein had no credentials when he wrote his papers on special relativity, Richard had countered. Eleanor had smiled thinly. "We only get one Einstein per century, Richard. What makes you think your delivery boy is him?" Richard had placed one of Alex's notebooks on her desk. "Read pages 47 through 62. Then tell me he doesn't deserve a chance." Now, watching Alex's hunched shoulders and nervous hands, Richard wondered if he had been too hasty, too eager to thrust this brilliant but unprepared young man into the cutthroat world of academic physics. Perhaps they should have proceeded, more cautiously, allowed Alex time to acclimate gradually. "They'll change their minds when they see the results," Richard said, trying to sound more confident than he felt. "Science is ultimately about evidence, not credentials." Alex gave him a look that suggested he found this statement naively optimistic, but he returned his attention to the simulation without further comment. The first real breakthrough came on a rainy Tuesday in April. They had been working for nearly 12 hours straight, fueled by vending machine coffee and the sandwiches Richard's wife Sarah had thoughtfully packed for them. The simulation was testing a cornerstone of Alex's theory, a mathematical model predicting how entangled particles would behave in the presence of intense gravitational fields. According to conventional quantum mechanics, the correlation between entangled particles should eventually break down under such conditions. But Alex's equations suggested something different, that the entanglement would actually strengthen, creating what he called gravitational resonance chains that could theoretically transmit information faster than light without violating relativity. It was an audacious claim, one that would be immediately dismissed as crackpot science if presented without rigorous mathematical support, which was why they needed the simulation to work. "It's still not converging," Alex muttered, running his hands through his hair in frustration. He had been tweaking parameters for hours, trying to get the computational model to match his theoretical predictions. "Maybe I was wrong. Maybe the whole framework is flawed." Richard studied the screen, watching the colorful representations of particle interactions flicker and dance. Something about the pattern seemed off, but he couldn't quite identify the issue. "Let's take a step back," he suggested. "Walk me through the primary equation again." Alex sighed but began to recite the mathematical framework that underpinned his theory. As he spoke, Richard closed his eyes, visualizing the equations as geometric shapes in his mind, an old technique he had developed during his doctoral studies. Suddenly, he saw it. "The boundary conditions," he interrupted. "You're using a spherical field boundary for the gravitational influence, but your original equations assume a toroidal field, don't they?" Alex's eyes widened. He turned back to the computer, fingers flying over the keyboard as he modified the simulation parameters. "You're right. How did I miss that?" The simulation restarted, processing the new parameters. For several minutes, they watched in tense silence as the computer crunched the enormous data set. Then the screen changed. The particle interactions shifted, forming intricate patterns that pulsed with an almost hypnotic rhythm. "It's converging," Alex breathed, leaning forward. "The correlation values they're exactly matching the predictions." Richard felt a chill run down his spine. If the simulation was correct, if Alex's theory was valid, they were looking at one of the most significant breakthroughs in quantum physics since Bell's theorem. This wasn't just an incremental advance. It was a fundamental reframing of how quantum particles interact across space-time. "We need to verify this," Richard said, his voice steady despite the excitement bubbling beneath the surface. "Run a different data set, change the initial conditions. If it holds up, we have empirical support for the theory." Alex finished, already typing commands to initiate a new simulation. They worked through the night, testing variation after variation, each time finding that the results aligned with Alex's predictions. By dawn, they had compiled enough data to write a preliminary paper. As the first rays of sunlight filtered through the lab windows, Alex slumped in his chair, exhaustion finally overtaking excitement. "What happens now?" he asked, stifling. A yawn. Richard saved their work to a secure server, making multiple backups. "Now we write it up, clearly, methodically, with every supporting calculation and simulation result documented. And then we submit it to physical review letters." Alex looked startled. "Physical review letters? But that's the most prestigious physics journal in the world," Richard acknowledged, "and precisely where this work belongs." For the next 3 weeks, they crafted the paper with painstaking precision. Richard taught Alex the formal structure of academic writing, the measured language, the cautious claims, the thorough documentation of methods. Alex absorbed these lessons with the same rapid comprehension he showed for complex physics. Though he occasionally chafed at the constraints. "Why can't we just say what it means?" he complained one afternoon, pointing to a particularly dense paragraph about the implications of gravitational resonance chains. "This makes it sound so small, like we're just tweaking some minor aspect of quantum theory." Richard smiled. "That's deliberate. Understatement is a virtue in academic publishing, Alex. Make too bold a claim, and reviewers will dismiss you before they've even evaluated your evidence." "That's ridiculous," Alex muttered, but he rewrote the paragraph according to Richard's guidance. The day they submitted the paper, Richard took Alex to the Eagle, a historic pub near the university where Watson and Crick had announced their discovery of the structure of DNA decades earlier. They found a quiet corner table, and Richard ordered 2 pints of ale. "To new discoveries," he said, raising his glass. Alex clinked his glass against Richard's, but seemed subdued. "How long until we hear back?" "Normally, several months," Richard admitted. "But I pulled some strings. Called in a few favors with colleagues on the editorial board. They've agreed to expedite the review process. And if it's rejected, Richard took a long sip of his ale before responding. Then we revise and resubmit, or try another journal, but it won't be rejected. How can you be so sure? Alex asked, his fingers nervously tracing patterns in the condensation on his glass. Because I've reviewed thousands of papers during my career, Richard said. I know the difference between incremental science and revolutionary science. What we've submitted is the latter. Alex nodded, but the worry remained in his eyes. Richard understood. For him, rejection would be a setback. For Alex, it would be confirmation of his deepest fear, that he didn't belong in this world, that his self-taught brilliance wasn't enough to earn him a place among the scientific elite. The response came faster than either of them expected. Just 10 days after submission, Richard received an email from the journal editor. He was in his office. When it arrived, Alex working quietly at a desk they had set up in the corner. It's from Physical Review Letters, Richard announced, clicking to open the message. Alex froze, pencil hovering above his notebook. What does it say? Richard scanned the email, his expression giving nothing away. Then he looked up, a slow smile spreading across his face. They want to publish it. Fast-track publication in the next issue. For a moment, Alex didn't react. Then he blinked rapidly, as if trying to process the information. They're accepting it, just like that. Not just accepting it, Richard said, turning the screen so Alex could read the email. The editor calls it potentially groundbreaking and suggests it may fundamentally alter our understanding of quantum gravitational interactions. That's about as close to effusive praise as you'll ever get from a physics journal. A disbelieving laugh escaped Alex's lips. So it's really happening. People will actually read my theory. Every physicist in the world will read it, Richard affirmed, and many of them won't sleep afterward because they'll be too busy trying to understand the implications. In the following days, Richard noticed a subtle change in Alex. He stood straighter, spoke with more confidence, met the gaze of other faculty members rather than looking away. He even purchased 2 new shirts and a pair of trousers, though his overall appearance remained decidedly more casual than the typical Cambridge researcher. The paper was published on a Wednesday. By Thursday morning, Richard's inbox was flooded with emails from colleagues around the world, some congratulatory, others skeptical, all intensely interested. His office phone rang constantly until he finally unplugged it. 3 different news outlets requested interviews, which Richard politely declined, explaining that they needed more time to develop the experimental implications of their theory. Alex, meanwhile, found himself suddenly visible in a way he had never experienced before. Students who had previously ignored or mocked him now tried to engage him in conversation. Faculty members who had questioned his presence now invited him to departmental seminars. Even Professor Chen, who had been so dubious about his appointment, stopped him in the corridor to offer a terse but sincere acknowledgement of his achievement. The most important thing now, Richard cautioned, as they made their way to the computing lab on Friday morning, is not to get distracted. This is just the beginning. We need to focus on the follow-up work, expanding the theory, designing experiments to test its predictions, addressing the inevitable criticisms. Alex nodded, though his attention seemed divided. He had received a call from his sister that morning. She had seen his name mentioned in a science news article and was frantically proud and confused in equal measure. Jennifer's telling everyone her brother's a famous scientist now, he said, with a mixture of embarrassment and pride. I tried to explain that publishing one paper doesn't make me famous, but she's excited. Richard smiled. Your sister's not. Entirely wrong. In the world of theoretical physics, you've certainly made a splash. They settled into work, mapping out the next phase of their research program. They had just begun discussing a potential collaboration with the university's experimental physics group when a soft knock interrupted them. Come in, Richard called, expecting one of his colleagues or perhaps a curious graduate student. Instead, a tall woman with silver-streaked dark hair and sharp assessing eyes entered the lab. She wore a tailored grey suit and carried herself with the confident authority of someone accustomed to command. Richard recognized her immediately and rose to his feet. "Dr. Lowell," he said, extending his hand. "This is an unexpected honor." Dr. Catherine Lowell, director of the Princeton Institute for Advanced Study, was one of the most influential figures in theoretical physics. Her work on quantum cosmology had earned her a Nobel Prize, and her endorsement could make or break a scientific career. "Professor Harlow," she acknowledged, shaking his hand firmly before turning her gaze to Alex, who had also stood, looking distinctly uncomfortable. "And you must be Alexander Reyes, the delivery boy who's rewriting quantum mechanics." Alex flushed. "Yes, ma'am." "I flew in this morning," Dr. Lowell continued, settling uninvited into one of the lab chairs. "Read your paper on the flight twice. It's quite extraordinary." "Thank you," Alex said, his voice barely audible. Dr. Lowell studied him, her expression unreadable. "Cambridge is buzzing with rumors about you, Mr. Reyes. That you have no formal training, that you developed your theories while delivering pizzas, that you solved problems in your spare time that have stumped the greatest minds in physics for decades." She paused. "Are the rumors true?" Alex looked to Richard, who gave him an encouraging nod. "More or less," he admitted. "I never had the opportunity for university education. But I've always been interested in physics, and I had access to the library and online lectures." "Remarkable," Dr. Lowell murmured. She turned to Richard. "You recognized his talent immediately?" Richard chuckled. "Not immediately, no. I was rather skeptical at first, but the mathematics spoke for itself." "Indeed it does." Dr. Lowell turned back to Alex. "The Princeton Institute has a special fellowship program for exceptional talent. It doesn't require formal credentials. Einstein himself was our first fellow. It provides complete research freedom, generous funding, and collaboration opportunities with the world's leading physicists." She reached into her briefcase and withdrew a folder. "I'd like to offer you a position, Mr. Reyes." Alex stared at her, then at the folder, then at Richard. "But our work here would continue, of course," Dr. Lowell assured him. "Professor Harlow would be welcome to visit the Institute as often as he wishes. But at Princeton, you would have resources that Cambridge simply cannot match, and complete freedom to pursue your ideas wherever they lead." Richard felt a complex mixture of emotions: pride that his protégé was being recognized at the highest level, sadness at the thought of losing his daily collaboration with this extraordinary mind, worry that Alex might not be prepared for the intense scrutiny and pressure of the Institute. "It's a tremendous opportunity, Alex," he said, keeping his voice neutral. "One that comes along very rarely." Alex was silent for a long moment, his gaze dropping to his hands. "Dr. Lowell," he finally said, "I'm honored by your offer, but I would need to think about it. This has all happened very fast, and Professor Harlow and I are in the middle of important work." Dr. Lowell nodded, not appearing surprised or offended. "Of course, take a week to consider. The Institute is prepared to accommodate your needs, including medical coverage for your sister, housing assistance, whatever might concern you." She stood, placing the folder on the table. "My contact information is inside. I look forward to hearing from you." After she left, silence filled the lab. Alex stared at the folder as if it might suddenly sprout teeth. "You should accept," Richard said quietly. Alex looked up, startled. "You want me to leave?" "Of course not," Richard replied. "Working with you has been the most intellectually stimulating experience of my career, but the Institute can offer you opportunities that I simply cannot. And your work, your ideas, deserve the best possible environment to flourish." "But what about our follow-up research? The experimental designs? All the plans we made? We can still collaborate remotely, Richard assured him. And as Dr. Lowell said, I can visit Princeton. This isn't an ending, Alex. It's the next chapter. Alex picked up the folder, thumbing through the materials inside with a dazed expression. Princeton, he murmured. 6 months ago, I was delivering pizzas at midnight, and now Princeton wants me. Because you've earned it, Richard said firmly, not through conventional channels, but through the sheer power of your intellect and creativity. Don't ever doubt that you deserve this opportunity. The transformation was remarkable to witness. In the days following Dr. Lowell's visit, Alex seemed to grow into himself, shedding the hesitant demeanor of the delivery boy and embracing his identity as a physicist. He still had moments of doubt. Richard would catch him staring off into space, a worried crease between his brows, but they became less frequent as he immersed himself in their work. They spent the week developing an experimental protocol to test the gravitational resonance chain hypothesis, collaborating with Dr. Javier Mendez, an experimental physicist who specialized in quantum entanglement. Dr. Mendez was initially skeptical, but became increasingly enthusiastic as they walked him through the theoretical framework. If you're right about this, he told Alex, it could revolutionize quantum communication, possibly even quantum computing. Alex nodded, his expression thoughtful. The information transfer implications are significant, but I'm more interested in what it tells us about the fundamental nature of space-time. Richard observed this exchange with quiet pride. 6 months ago, Alex would have been too intimidated to express a differing perspective to an established physicist. Now he did so naturally, with the quiet confidence of someone who knew the value of his own ideas. On the final day of the week, Dr. Lowell had given them to consider her offer. Richard invited Alex to his home for dinner. Sarah, Richard's wife, had been curious about the young man who had so dramatically altered her husband's professional trajectory. The Harlow residence was a comfortable Victorian townhouse near the university, filled with books, antique furniture, and the subtle evidence of a long, happy marriage. Alex arrived promptly at 7, bearing a small bouquet of flowers for Sarah and a bottle of wine that Richard suspected had cost him a significant portion of his weekly stipend. Welcome, Sarah greeted him warmly, accepting the flowers with genuine appreciation. Richard has told me so much about you. Alex smiled shyly. All good things, I hope. He says you're the most brilliant physicist he's encountered in 30 years of teaching, Sarah replied, leading them into the dining room where the table was set with her best china. And Richard is not a man who offers praise lightly. Throughout dinner, Sarah drew Alex out with gentle questions about his background, his sister, his interests outside of physics. Richard watched as the young man gradually relaxed, the tension leaving his shoulders as he described teaching himself calculus at 14, using textbooks from the public library, and his efforts to ensure his sister could attend community college despite their limited means. And now Princeton wants you, Sarah said, serving apple tart for dessert. Have you decided whether to accept? Alex glanced at Richard before responding. I'm still weighing the options. It's an incredible opportunity, but you're loyal to Richard, Sarah finished for him, and perhaps a bit frightened of such a dramatic change. Alex ducked his head, acknowledging the truth of her assessment. I wouldn't have any of these opportunities if Professor Harlow hadn't taken a chance on me. Which is precisely why you should accept the Princeton offer, Richard interjected. My role was simply to recognize what was already there, Alex. Your talent, your insights, those are entirely your own, and they deserve the platform that the Institute can provide. Later, as they sat in Richard's study with glasses of brandy, Alex finally made his decision. I'll accept the fellowship, he said quietly, but I want us to continue collaborating. This theory, It's as much yours now as it is mine. Richard shook his head firmly. The core insights are entirely yours, Alex. I've merely helped shape them into a form the scientific community can digest. Still, Alex insisted, I wouldn't have gotten here without you, and I don't want to go forward without your input. Richard felt a warmth that had nothing to do with the brandy. Then we'll continue as partners across the distance, and, who knows, perhaps in a few years I'll retire from Cambridge and join you at Princeton as your research assistant. Alex laughed, then grew serious again. I've been thinking about my sister. The fellowship includes family medical coverage, which would be life-changing for Jennifer. Her condition requires ongoing treatment, and the bills have been... Say no more, Richard said gently. Family comes first. Always. On his last day at Cambridge, Alex arrived at Richard's office carrying a small, carefully wrapped package. A token of my appreciation, he said, placing it on the desk. Richard unwrapped it to find a beautifully bound notebook, its cover embossed with his name. Open it, Alex urged. Inside, on the first page, Alex had written in his precise hand, to Professor Richard Harlow, who taught me that science is not just about understanding the universe, but about having the courage to challenge our understanding with eternal gratitude, Alex Reyes. The rest of the notebook was blank, waiting to be filled. For your next great insight, Alex explained, because I don't believe for a moment that you're done making contributions to physics. Richard was momentarily speechless, touched by the thoughtfulness of the gift. Thank you, he finally managed. This means a great deal to me. They spent the remainder of the day finalizing their research notes and planning their continued collaboration. Richard had arranged for Alex to have full remote access to Cambridge's computational resources, and they had scheduled weekly video conferences to discuss their ongoing work. As the afternoon light began to fade, casting long shadows across the office, Richard realized it was time to say goodbye. Princeton awaits, he said, rising from his chair. Dr. Lowell's assistant called this morning to confirm your housing arrangements. Everything is prepared for your arrival. Alex nodded, suddenly looking young and vulnerable again. I'm nervous, he admitted. What if I can't live up to their expectations? What if the first paper was just lucky? Richard placed a hand on his shoulder. Science isn't about luck, Alex. It's about insight, perseverance, and the courage to question established wisdom. You have all three in abundance, he smiled. And if you ever doubt yourself, remember that you're the delivery boy who corrected a Cambridge professor's equations and then proceeded to rewrite quantum mechanics. A slow grin spread across Alex's face. When you put it that way. They walked together to the entrance of the physics building, where a taxi waited to take Alex to the train station. The Princeton Institute had arranged for a first-class ticket to London, followed by a flight to New York the next morning. This isn't goodbye, Richard said firmly as they shook hands. It's merely a change of scenery. Alex nodded, his eyes bright with unshed tears. Thank you, Professor, for everything. As the taxi pulled away, Richard stood watching until it disappeared around the corner. A complex mixture of emotions churned within him. Pride, loss, excitement for what the future might hold. He had spent most of his career pursuing his own ambitions, seeking recognition and status within the scientific community. How strange that his most significant contribution might come not through his own research, but through his recognition of another's brilliance. He turned and walked slowly back to his office, his mind already filled with ideas for their next collaboration. The quantum correspondence theory was just the beginning. With Alex at Princeton and himself at Cambridge, they could build a transatlantic partnership that might reshape our understanding of the universe's most fundamental laws. As he settled back at his desk, Richard opened the notebook Alex had given him and began to write. Princeton in autumn was a tapestry of amber and crimson, the historic buildings standing proud among trees ablaze with color. The Institute for Advanced Study occupied a quiet corner of the campus, its understated architecture belying the intellectual revolutions that had been born within its walls. Alex Reyes pulled his thin jacket tighter against the October chill as he approached the building that would house his office. 6 months had passed since he'd left Cambridge. 6 months of intense work, heated debates, and gradual acceptance into this rarefied world of theoretical physics. Inside, the corridor leading to his office was lined with photographs of previous fellows, Einstein, Oppenheimer, Gödel, and others whose work had transformed human understanding. Each time Alex walked this hallway, he felt like an imposter, waiting for security to arrive and escort him from the premises. Today, the feeling was particularly acute as he prepared for the Institute's annual symposium, where he would present the latest developments in quantum correspondence theory to an audience of the world's most distinguished physicists. His office was small but elegant, with large windows overlooking a wooded area where deer sometimes ventured in the early morning. Books and journals filled the shelves, and 3 whiteboards covered with equations dominated the walls. It was still hard to believe this space belonged to him. He set down his backpack and booted up his computer to check for messages from Richard. Their collaboration had continued unabated despite the Atlantic Ocean between them, with daily emails and weekly video conferences where they exchanged ideas and refined their theoretical framework. There was indeed an email waiting from Richard, sent at what must have been 3 a.m. Cambridge time. Breakthrough on the entanglement decay problem. Call when you can. Alex immediately initiated a video call, forgetting the time difference. To his surprise, Richard answered promptly, looking disheveled but energized. "Sorry, did I wake you?" Alex asked, noting the darkness visible through the window behind Richard. Richard waved dismissively. "I haven't been to bed yet. Too excited about this solution." He held up several pages of handwritten calculations. "I've found a way to address the decay rate anomaly in the quantum resonance model." The decay rate anomaly had been a persistent thorn in their side. Experimental data showing that entangled particles in strong gravitational fields lost coherence faster than their theory predicted. It was a small discrepancy, but in physics, small discrepancies often pointed to fundamental flaws in understanding. "Let me see," Alex said eagerly, leaning closer to the screen as Richard held the pages up to his webcam. The solution was elegant, modifying their equations to account for what Richard called gravitational phase shifting, a subtle effect that only became significant in extreme conditions. "This is brilliant," Alex murmured, already making notes. "It preserves the core theoretical framework while explaining the experimental variance." "I thought you'd appreciate it," Richard said, failing to suppress a yawn. "It came to me around midnight, and I've been working it through ever since." Alex studied his mentor's face, noting the dark circles under his eyes and the increased gray at his temples. "You're pushing yourself too hard," he said gently. "We agreed this would be a marathon, not a sprint." Richard ran a hand through his disheveled hair. "Perhaps, but I wanted to have this ready before your symposium presentation. Speaking of which, how are the preparations coming along?" "Nearly finished," Alex replied, gesturing to a stack of presentation slides on his desk. "Though I'm going to have to revise the section on decay rates now, thanks to you." "Will Dr. Lowell be there?" Richard asked. Alex nodded. "Along with the entire theoretical physics division and representatives from CERN, Fermilab, and 2 other research institutes I can't remember." "Nervous?" Terrified," Alex admitted with a wry smile. "What if they ask questions I can't answer? What if they find some fundamental flaw we've overlooked?" Richard's expression softened. "Then we'll learn something new. That's science, Alex. It's Not about being infallible, it's about being open to correction. He paused. Besides, after 6 months of ruthless peer review and experimental validation, I think our theory is on pretty solid ground. After ending the call, Alex spent the morning integrating Richard's solution into his presentation. The decay rate anomaly had been the last significant criticism of their theory, and addressing it would strengthen their case considerably. By noon, he was satisfied with the revisions and decided to take a walk to clear his head before the symposium. The Institute's grounds were quiet. Most researchers already gathered in the auditorium for the day's earlier presentations. Alex found a secluded bench beneath a maple tree and sat down, pulling from his pocket the small, worn photograph that had accompanied him from Cambridge to Princeton. It showed his sister Jennifer at her high school graduation, her smile bright. Despite the pain she must have been feeling that day, her chronic illness had shaped both their lives, consuming their mother's limited income and forcing Alex to abandon his own education to support the family after their father left. Jennifer was doing better now. The medical coverage provided by his Princeton fellowship had given her access to treatments that had previously been unaffordable. She had resumed her studies at community college, and her last email had mentioned the possibility of transferring to a 4-year university the following semester. For all the intellectual excitement of the past 6 months, it was Jennifer's improvement that gave Alex the deepest satisfaction. He tucked the photo back into his pocket and checked his watch. 2 hours until the symposium. 2 hours until he either established himself as a legitimate voice in theoretical physics or exposed himself as a fraud who had somehow fooled the entire scientific community. Drawing a deep breath, he stood and began walking toward the auditorium, rehearsing his opening remarks in his head. The wood-paneled lecture hall was already half full when Alex arrived. He recognized many faces from seminars and faculty meetings. Dr. Lowell in the front row, of course, and beside her, Professor Hiroshi Tanaka, whose work on quantum gravity had earned him a Nobel Prize a decade earlier. Several younger researchers from the Institute's Quantum Information Division were seated together, and in the back, a cluster of graduate students with expressions of mingled excitement and intimidation. Alex made his way to the small preparation room behind the stage, where he found a surprise waiting for him. Richard Harlow stood by the window, looking slightly rumpled in a travel-worn suit. "Richard!" Alex exclaimed. "What are you doing here? I thought you couldn't get away this week." Richard smiled, the corners of his eyes crinkling. "And miss your first major presentation?" I caught the red eye. He gestured to a small suitcase in the corner. "Came straight from the airport." A wave of gratitude washed over Alex. Despite their daily communications, he had missed Richard's steady, reassuring presence. "I've incorporated your solution into the presentation," he said. "Credited you prominently, of course." "Our solution?" Richard corrected gently. "This is a partnership, remember?" A knock at the door interrupted them. Dr. Lowell entered, elegant as always, in a charcoal suit. "Ah, Professor Harlow," she said, extending her hand. "I thought I might find you here. Welcome to Princeton." "Thank you, Catherine," Richard replied. "I appreciate you accommodating my last-minute visit." Dr. Lowell turned to Alex. "5 minutes, Mr. Reyes. We have a full house, including representatives from the National Science Foundation and the Department of Energy." She gave him an appraising look. "Nervous?" "Trying not to be," Alex answered honestly. Her expression softened slightly. "You'll do fine. Your work speaks for itself." With a nod to both of them, she left to return to the auditorium. Alex adjusted his tie, a recent addition to his wardrobe that still felt foreign around his neck. "I wish I had your confidence in public speaking," he said to Richard. "You forget that I've been teaching for 25 years, Richard replied, "and I still get butterflies before important presentations." He placed a hand on Alex's shoulder. Just remember, every person in that audience is genuinely interested in what you have to say. Your ideas matter to them. Moments later, Alex found himself standing at the podium, facing a sea of expectant faces. The lights were dimmed, except for those illuminating the stage, making it difficult to see beyond the first few rows. He cleared his throat, acutely aware of the silence that had fallen over the room. "Good afternoon," he began, his voice steadier than he had expected. "For the past year, Professor Richard Harlow and I have been developing a theoretical framework that we believe offers a new perspective on the relationship between quantum mechanics and gravity." As he spoke, displaying equations and diagrams, on the large screen behind him, Alex felt a familiar sense of clarity descend. The nervousness receded, replaced by the pure intellectual excitement that had driven him since childhood. This was what he was meant to do: articulate the patterns and relationships he perceived in the fundamental fabric of reality. For 40 minutes, he guided the audience through the quantum correspondence theory, explaining how gravitational resonance chains could transmit quantum information across space-time without violating relativistic principles. He presented the experimental results that supported their predictions, including the latest data incorporating Richard's solution to the decay rate anomaly. When he finally concluded and invited questions, there was a moment of silence. Then Professor Tanaka raised his hand. "Mr. Reyes, your theory suggests that quantum entanglement is preserved, even enhanced, in strong gravitational fields. This contradicts established models of decoherence. How do you reconcile this apparent paradox?" Alex took a deep breath. This was exactly the kind of fundamental challenge he had feared. But as he began to respond, explaining how gravitational phase shifting actually preserved quantum coherence through a mechanism analogous to resonance in classical systems, he realized he was enjoying himself. This wasn't an interrogation. It was a conversation among peers who shared his fascination with the universe's deepest mysteries. Question followed. Question, each more technically demanding than the last. A researcher from CERN asked about experimental protocols for testing gravitational resonance. A quantum information theorist challenged his mathematical derivation of the correspondence principle. A cosmologist questioned the implications for black hole information paradoxes. To each, Alex provided clear, thoughtful responses, occasionally deferring to Richard for historical context or referring to specific sections of their published papers. When he didn't know an answer, he said so directly, suggesting possible approaches rather than attempting to bluff. After nearly an hour of intense discussion, Dr. Lowell finally stood to indicate that the session was concluding. "Thank you, Mr. Reyes, for a most illuminating presentation. I believe I speak for all of us when I say that the quantum correspondence theory represents a significant advancement in our field. We look forward to following its continued development and experimental validation." The applause that followed was warm and sustained. As Alex gathered his notes, several attendees approached the podium to continue the discussion, creating an impromptu gathering that spilled into the reception area outside the auditorium. For the next 2 hours, Alex found himself at the center of animated conversations about the implications of his work, receiving business cards and invitations to collaborate from researchers he had previously known only through their publications. Richard observed this scene with quiet satisfaction, occasionally joining a discussion, but mostly allowing Alex to hold the spotlight. When the crowd finally began to disperse, he approached his former assistant with a smile. "Congratulations," he said simply. "You've arrived." Alex frowned slightly. "What do you mean? Look around you," Richard replied, gesturing to the departing physicists, many still engrossed in discussions sparked by the presentation. 6 months ago, they viewed you as a curiosity, the delivery boy with an interesting idea. Today, they're treating you as a colleague whose insights might reshape their own research. That's no small achievement. Later that evening, Dr. Lowell hosted a small dinner at her home for Alex, Richard, and several key institute faculty. The conversation ranged widely, from the philosophical implications of quantum correspondence to the practical challenges of experimental verification. Alex, seated between Richard and Professor Tanaka, found himself engaging comfortably in debates that would have terrified him only months earlier. As coffee was served, Dr. Lowell turned the discussion to the future. The Institute's board is extremely pleased with the attention your work has attracted, Alex, she said. We're prepared to extend your fellowship for an additional 3 years with increased funding for experimental collaborations. Alex glanced at Richard before responding. That's very generous, Dr. Lowell. I'd be honored to continue my research here. Excellent, she said, setting down her coffee cup. And there's another matter I wanted to discuss with both of you. The NSF representatives who attended today's symposium were quite impressed. They've expressed interest in funding a joint research program between Princeton and Cambridge, focusing on quantum correspondence applications. Richard leaned forward. What sort of applications do they have in mind? Primarily quantum communication and computing, Dr. Lowell replied. If your theory is correct about gravitational resonance chains preserving entanglement across significant distances, it could revolutionize secure communication technology, and the Department of Energy has expressed interest in potential energy generation applications, though I admit I'm skeptical about those near-term prospects. Alex felt a flicker of unease. We've been focused on the theoretical framework, not practical applications. Some of those possibilities are still quite speculative. Of course, Dr. Lowell acknowledged, but that's precisely why the NSF wants to support continued research. They're prepared to commit substantial resources, enough to establish dedicated laboratories at both institutions, with you two as co-directors. Richard exchanged a glance with Alex. It sounds like an extraordinary opportunity, he said carefully, though I suspect Cambridge might have administrative hurdles to overcome for such an arrangement. Leave that to me, Dr. Lowell said with a dismissive wave. I've already spoken with your Vice-Chancellor. He's amenable, particularly given the funding involved. She turned to Alex. What do you think, Mr. Reyes? Ready to direct your own research program? Alex hesitated, overwhelmed by the rapid elevation from research assistant to potential laboratory director. I would need to consider the details carefully, he said, particularly regarding the balance between theoretical development and application-focused research. A wise approach, Professor Tanaka interjected. Revolutionary theories require time to mature. Too rapid a push toward applications can sometimes obscure deeper implications. The conversation shifted to other topics, but Alex remained preoccupied by Dr. Lowell's proposal. After dinner, as he and Richard walked back to the guest apartments, where Richard was staying, he voiced his concerns. It's happening too fast, he said. 6 months ago, I was delivering pizzas. Now they want me to direct a multi-million-dollar research program. I don't even have a bachelor's degree. Richard chuckled. If it's credentials you're worried about, Princeton could arrange an honorary doctorate. But I suspect that's not the real issue. Alex sighed, his breath visible in the chilly night air. The theory still feels incomplete. There are aspects we haven't fully explored, questions we haven't answered. If we pivot to applications now, we might miss something fundamental. I share your concern, Richard admitted. Scientific history is littered with promising theories that were prematurely applied before their full implications were understood. He was quiet for a moment. But there's also a practical reality to consider. Funding of this magnitude doesn't come along often, especially for purely theoretical work. It could secure your position in the field for years to come. At what cost, though? Alex asked, stopping to look up at the stars scattered across the clear autumn sky. I didn't get into this for job security or institutional prestige. I just wanted to understand how the universe works. Richard studied his protégé's face, illuminated in the soft glow of the pathway lights. Then tell Catherine that. Be clear about your priorities. If Princeton truly values your contributions, they'll accommodate your research vision. The following morning, Richard departed for Cambridge, promising to return for a longer visit once the details of the joint research program were established. Alex spent the next few weeks carefully considering Dr. Lowell's proposal, consulting with both Richard and Jennifer about the potential implications for his future. His sister, practical as always, emphasized the security and prestige the position would bring. "You've spent your whole life worrying about money, Alex," she reminded him during one of their weekly calls. "This could change that forever." Richard, meanwhile, advised balance. "Accept the directorship, but negotiate terms that protect your theoretical work," he suggested. "Insist on dedicated time for pure research, separate from application development. The best directors lead by example, continuing their own intellectual explorations even as they guide others." After much deliberation, Alex scheduled a meeting with Dr. Lowell to discuss his decision. Her office at the Institute was a testament to her distinguished career. Walls lined with awards, photographs with world leaders, and framed covers of scientific journals featuring her work. She welcomed him warmly, gesturing to a comfortable chair across from her desk. "I've considered your proposal," Alex began, "and I'm prepared to accept the co-directorship of the Quantum Correspondence Laboratory, with certain conditions." Dr. Lowell leaned back in her chair, an amused expression crossing her face. "Conditions. Most young researchers would jump at this opportunity without qualification." "I'm not most researchers," Alex replied, surprised by his own boldness. "And quantum correspondence theory isn't most theories. If we're going to develop it properly, I need assurances." "I'm listening," Dr. Lowell said, her expression now genuinely curious. "First, I want to maintain at least 30% of my time for pure theoretical research, unconnected to immediate applications. Second, I'd like Jennifer Reyes, my sister, to be offered a full scholarship to complete her undergraduate studies at Princeton. And third, I want assurance that publication of our findings won't be restricted by commercial or security interests." Dr. Lowell was silent for a moment, then smiled slightly. "6 months ago, you wouldn't have had the confidence to make such demands. 6 months ago, I was delivering pizzas," Alex reminded her. She laughed. "Touché." She considered the requests. "The research time is reasonable, essential even, for maintaining intellectual vitality. Your sister's scholarship can be arranged through the university's need-based programs. The publication rights may be more complicated given potential national security implications, but I believe we can establish reasonable guidelines." Alex nodded, relieved that his conditions weren't being dismissed outright. "Then we have an agreement." "We do," Dr. Lowell confirmed. "I'll have the formal offer documents prepared by the end of the week." She stood and extended her hand. "Congratulations, Dr. Reyes. I look forward to seeing where you take us next." As Alex left her office, the title she had used, Dr. Reyes, echoed in his mind. He still wasn't accustomed to the honorary doctorate Princeton had conferred on him in a small ceremony attended by Richard, Jennifer, and the Institute's faculty. The framed certificate hung in his office, a daily reminder of how far he had come from his delivery days. The weeks that followed were a whirlwind of activity. Plans for the new laboratory moved forward with surprising speed, with architects, consulting Alex on the design of research spaces and equipment specifications. Richard made several trips to Princeton to assist with planning, and together they began recruiting a small team of postdoctoral researchers and technical staff. Jennifer, meanwhile, received her acceptance letter from Princeton University, along with a comprehensive scholarship package that covered not only tuition, but living expenses and continued medical care. When Alex called to share the news, she wept openly. "I never thought I'd get to go to a school like Princeton," she said, her voice trembling. "Mom would be so proud of us both." The mention of their mother, who had died from cancer when Jennifer was 14 and Alex 19, brought a lump to Alex's throat. "She would," he agreed softly, "though she'd probably still ask why we don't call more often." By the spring, construction of the laboratory was well underway, with completion expected by late summer. The Cambridge facility, under Richard's direction, was progressing on a similar timeline. The first joint research meeting was scheduled for September, when the initial team of 8 researchers, 4 from each institution, would begin formulating experimental protocols to test the theory's more radical predictions. As exciting as these developments were, Alex found himself increasingly drawn back to the theoretical questions that had first captivated him. Late at night, after the day's administrative tasks were complete, he would return to his equations, exploring dimensions of the theory that had not yet been fully articulated. It was during one of these late sessions that he began to see a pattern emerging, a connection between quantum correspondence and the information paradox of black holes that had eluded physicists for decades. He worked through the night, filling whiteboard after whiteboard with calculations. By dawn, he was convinced he had found something significant, a mathematical bridge between their theory and cosmic censorship, with implications for the very nature of information in the universe. Exhausted but exhilarated, he emailed Richard, "Need to speak urgently. May have solved the black hole information paradox." Richard's response came within minutes, despite the time difference. "Video call in 1 hour. Don't tell anyone else, yet." When Richard's face appeared on the screen, he looked both excited and cautious. "Walk me through it slowly," he said. "Start from first principles." For the next 2 hours, Alex explained his insight, with Richard asking probing questions and occasionally suggesting refinements. By the end, they were both convinced that Alex had indeed made a breakthrough, one that extended quantum correspondence theory into entirely new territory. "This is remarkable," Richard said, the awe evident in his voice. "If you're right, and I believe you are, this resolves one of the most persistent conflicts between quantum mechanics and general relativity. We need to publish immediately," Alex urged, "before the laboratory work begins consuming all our time." Richard nodded thoughtfully. "Agreed, but we should proceed carefully. This has profound implications beyond physics, philosophical implications about the nature of information and reality itself." They spent the next week refining the mathematics and drafting a paper, working in intense collaboration despite the ocean between them. When it was ready, they submitted it not to physical review letters, but to Nature, the most prestigious scientific journal in the world, where only research of exceptional significance was published. The response was unprecedented. Within 2 weeks, the editor-in-chief personally contacted them to express the journal's enthusiasm. The paper would be fast-tracked for publication in the next issue, with an accompanying editorial highlighting its significance. The day before publication, Alex received a call from Dr. Lowell. "Congratulations are in order," she said. "I've seen an advance copy of your Nature paper. It's, well, extraordinary is an understatement." "Thank you," Alex replied. "Richard, and I believe it represents the fullest expression of the theory to date." "It represents more than that," Dr. Lowell said. "It represents a paradigm shift in theoretical physics. The Nobel Committee has already taken notice. Alex nearly dropped the phone. The Nobel Committee? But the paper hasn't even been published yet. The committee keeps close watch on breakthrough work, Dr. Lowell explained, and yours qualifies by any standard. I wouldn't be surprised if you and Richard are on the shortlist for next year's prize. After the call ended, Alex sat motionless at his desk, trying to process what he had just heard. The Nobel Prize in Physics, the highest honor in his field, awarded to the likes of Einstein, Bohr, and Feynman. It seemed impossibly remote from the life he had known just 18 months earlier, delivering pizzas to pay for community college courses. He reached for his phone to call Richard, then hesitated. The possibility of a Nobel Prize was too overwhelming to discuss just yet, too dreamlike to articulate. Instead, he picked up the photo of Jennifer from his desk and studied it, remembering the sacrifices and struggles that had shaped their lives. Whatever accolades might come, whatever recognition the scientific establishment might bestow, the true meaning of his work lay in the questions it answered and the possibilities it opened. Not just for physics, but for human understanding of reality itself. Tomorrow, the world would read their paper. Tomorrow, the conversation about quantum correspondence theory would expand beyond academic circles into the broader cultural discourse. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new skeptics, new defenders. But tonight, in the quiet of his office, surrounded by the equations that had become his life's work, Alex Reyes allowed himself a moment of pure, uncomplicated joy at the beauty of the universe he was helping to unveil. The Stockholm concert hall glowed with soft golden light as Alex Reyes adjusted his bow tie, still uncomfortable in the formal attire despite the past year of high-profile events and academic ceremonies. Behind him, Richard Harlow looked perfectly at ease in his tailored tuxedo, a hint of pride in his eyes as he watched his former protégé prepare for the most significant moment of their shared journey. 5 minutes, Dr. Reyes, the Nobel Committee attendant informed them politely before stepping away. I still can't believe this is happening, Alex murmured, gazing at the ornate doors that would soon open onto the grand ceremony hall. 3 years ago, I was delivering pizzas at 2 a.m. Richard placed a steadying hand on his shoulder and solving quantum equations on napkins at the same time. The world finally caught up to what was always inside you. The journey to this moment had been extraordinary. Their paper on quantum correspondence theory and its resolution of the black hole information paradox had ignited a revolution in theoretical physics. Laboratories around the world had confirmed their predictions through increasingly sophisticated experiments. Universities had restructured their physics departments to incorporate the new paradigm. And throughout it all, the unlikely partnership between the Cambridge professor and the former delivery boy had remained the driving force behind each new development. Jennifer appeared in the doorway, radiant in a deep blue evening gown, her once frail frame now healthy and strong thanks to the treatments her brother's success had made possible. She was in her final year at Princeton, studying biophysics with the same natural brilliance Alex had shown for quantum mechanics. They're ready for you, she announced, her voice trembling slightly with emotion. The king is already seated. As they moved toward the entrance, Dr. Catherine Lowell approached, elegant in formal attire. Congratulations again, both of you, she said. The Institute couldn't be prouder. She turned to Alex with a genuine smile. Your journey reminds us all why we pursue science, not for accolades, but for those rare moments when we glimpse the true nature of reality. The massive doors swung open, revealing an audience of dignitaries, scientists, and royal family members. The announcer's voice echoed through the hall. The Nobel Prize in Physics, presented to Professor Richard Harlow and Dr. Alexander Reyes for their revolutionary quantum correspondence theory, unifying quantum mechanics and general relativity. As they walked forward to accept humanity's highest scientific honor, Alex felt a strange sense of both completion and beginning. The theory that had begun on pizza delivery napkins had opened doors not just for him, but for an entire generation of young scientists who might otherwise have remained undiscovered. During his acceptance speech, Alex abandoned his prepared remarks to speak directly from the heart. The universe speaks a mathematical language that doesn't care about our credentials or backgrounds, he told the assembled audience. It whispers its secrets to anyone willing to listen with genuine curiosity. My journey from delivery boy to this stage wasn't about exceptional talent, but about exceptional opportunity, the opportunity Professor Harlow gave me when he chose to see possibility, where others saw only limitations. Later that evening at the Nobel banquet, Alex found himself seated beside a 16-year-old girl who had won Sweden's national physics competition. As they discussed her ideas about applying quantum correspondence to biological systems, Alex recognized in her eyes the same hunger for understanding that had driven him since childhood. "You should send me your papers," he told her. The Reyes-Harlow Institute is always looking for fresh perspectives. The institute, established with their Nobel Prize funds, was dedicated to identifying and supporting unconventional talent in theoretical physics. As the celebration continued around them, Richard joined Alex by a window overlooking snow-covered Stockholm. "I've been thinking about retirement," he said quietly. Alex looked at him in surprise. "But your work at Cambridge," Richard smiled. "The department is in good hands, and I'd like to focus on mentoring at our institute. There are more delivery boys and girls out there, solving equations in the margins of their lives. We need to find them." The next morning, as snowflakes drifted past their hotel window, Alex received an email from a community college professor in Brazil. Attached was a handwritten solution to a notoriously difficult quantum problem solved by a janitor who cleaned the college classrooms at night and studied the equations left on the boards. "I think you'll want to see this," the professor had written. "He reminds me of someone I read about." Alex smiled and forwarded the email to Richard with a simple message: "Our next fellow." Years passed, and the Reyes-Harlow Institute grew into a global network of unconventional brilliance. They found a taxi driver in Cairo with revolutionary ideas about cosmic inflation, a hospital orderly in Mumbai who had derived a new approach to quantum computing between shifts, a grandmother in Alaska who had been quietly solving topology problems for decades. Each was given the resources, mentorship, and platform that Alex had once received from Richard. On the 10th anniversary of their Nobel Prize, in a simple ceremony at the Institute's headquarters, Jennifer Reyes, now Dr. Jennifer Reyes, with her own groundbreaking work in quantum biology, unveiled a small plaque beside the entrance. It bore no names, no dates, just a simple inscription that captured the essence of her brother's journey. Brilliance exists everywhere. The greatest discovery is not finding the answer, but finding those who ask the questions. Richard, his hair now fully silver but his eyes still bright with curiosity, read the words and nodded in satisfaction. "That's the real legacy," he said quietly to Alex. "Not the equation that bears our names, but the minds we've helped uncover." Alex looked around at the diverse group of researchers gathered for the ceremony, former delivery workers, janitors, cashiers, and countless others who might never have entered science through conventional paths. "The delivery," he said with a smile, "was always just the beginning. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out."